Peace, everybody. It is I, the Energy Master, and you are watching the Leopard in the Mirror Canticle of the Mutant Guardian lecture series, season 2. And we are getting into that back matter of the book. If you don't have your copy, make sure that you go ahead and grab that. It is available on Amazon. Hopefully you checked out season 1 where we went through the actual Canticle, but then now we're in the back where I'm breaking down the concepts that inspired the work in the first place. All right, and today we are talking about the man in the house. No, this isn't a lecture on what happened in the 70s when the government intentionally worked to get black women to get rid of the men, get on welfare and food stamps and stuff like that, and say that I don't need a man. My daddy take care of me. And by daddy, I mean Uncle Sam. No, we're not talking about that. Not at all. We've been talking in the last couple of chapters about this figure that was constructed using these different letters for A in our alphabet and the tetrahedron. So between those geometries, a particular figure came out that we refer to as the running man, and now it's starting to develop and become more distinguished, and you get a chance to see why that is relevant. So as usual, I will read through it first, and then we'll go through it. Remember, I record these on Facebook Live first, and then I upload them to YouTube. So if you are watching on YouTube, make sure that you go ahead, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and then stay tuned for the episodes. Only good information is complete information that allows you to be able to, make a sound and complete judgment. If you don't have all the pieces of the movie, you can't, do you really know the story? Do you really know the story? Or at least do you know the creator's intent? So that's what we're doing. We're filling in the missing pieces of the story, the cosmic story. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. All right, the man in the house. After sitting with the running man for a few days, I realized that he needed breath or vibration to animate him. The Adamic body I made needed the life force of Eve, which in English comes from even. In Yoruba, Ina Ani can mean even fire or twin flame. While I originally sought the Sanskrit equivalent to A for this task, it occurred to me that while A was Allah in Arabic, Aleph was master in Hebrew. Master, M, being the 13th letter in the supreme alphabet. The 7 bija or seed sounds in yoga used to activate the chakras, Lam, Vam, Ram, Yam, Ham, Om, mostly end in the sound Am. Identifying the Sanskrit symbol for Om, meaning to sound, I placed it in an inverted tetrahedron to represent the feminine counterpart of the upright tetrahedron, as with the triangles of the hexagram or Star of David. When I brought this figure together with my running man in the fire, I immediately noticed that the quote-unquote loop in the Om symbol fit perfectly on the running man like a head, and the overall figure resembled a man sitting in a house. He appeared to be looking into a mirror that reflected either a shadow or a cobra. Shiva's Trishul weapon appeared to be sticking from the left side of the house. I called this figure the man in the house. As I placed a third, larger, right side up tetrahedron over this combined image, it fit perfectly and formed a Merkaba, the divine chariot of God described in Ezekiel and found in Jewish mysticism. Despite the popularity of the Merkaba's 2D projection, The hexagram as the symbol of Israel today, it only became associated with Judaism during the Zionist movement in 1897 CE. It was originally forbidden as it was considered a pagan symbol associated with the god Remphan, worshipped by Babylonians, Assyrians, Syrians, and Arab alchemists. The symbol does, however, have potentially thousands of years of association with the two-headed messenger Agu in Igbo culture, and use as far back as 4th millennium BCE in pre-Vedic India as the Shatkona. Hindu culture also associates the hexagram with the yoni, a representation of the female reproductive organs or the overall union between Shiva and Shakti. Considering the way the running man tetrahedron fits within the upside down Om tetrahedron, this resembles a child in the womb. All right, and I think that's the end of that. Yeah, because we got a blank page right there. All right, so let's bring it back to the top and let's talk about this, shall we? All right. And I apologize, y'all. I realized that in the last episode, I did not do much stuff on the whiteboard, but I think the explanation was pretty thorough. But I want to make sure that y'all understand what we're seeing here. All right, so we're already familiar with the general running man figure, where it kind of looks vaguely like a figure, like you could think of like a leg moving like this. It doesn't look like much there. But this is purely composed of the Latin A, the Aleph from Hebrew, and the Alif from Arabic. Okay, so like we'll go back through the paragraph, but then just like I was saying before, the logic was I wanted to overlay this with a sound, and so because the bija sounds, which are basically the seed sounds that stimulate the positions associated with the chakras, that common sound that's found in lam, vam, ram, all of those, that's the Sanskrit symbol for that. All right. As a matter of fact, let's write that over here. All right. We have that 3 looking thing here. Okay. And then it's got that little guy right here. All right. So this right here immediately resembled a head to me. So we get this loop right here. And so in placing it inside of a larger tetrahedron that perfectly inscribes the smaller one, you see that the original running man figure here attaches perfectly. It attaches perfectly to this Sanskrit symbol. So now that means we've got a Latin symbol, which comes from Phoenician originally. And you know, the Phoenician alphabet was basically the poor man's form of the Egyptian hieroglyphs, if you will. So we might as well call that Egyptian. Then we've got the Hebrew alphabet, and of course, when you started, the Hebrews used a Paleo-Hebrew script that was more similar to the Phoenician here, and so this script is actually the Ashuri script, which is an Aramaic script that was used by empires. Okay, so that is Aramaic block letters. And then you have the Arabic script, which it was itself a descendant of Nabatean. And within that Semitic script world, you also had part of the influences for Sanskrit. So Sanskrit was actually developed later. You have Vedic Sanskrit, and, you know, older ways of writing, but originally they were using the Brahmi script. So the Brahmi script was developed from those, you know, those Semitic scripts and some other influences. And then you had the Gupta script that came after that, and then finally later, and by that point Islam had risen and stuff. So it's like, so you start to kind of see some figures that look kind of like numerals inside of this. So there was a lot of thought that went into the geometry of these symbols, above and beyond just simply representing a sound. And so me seeing that, I'm like, okay, that's starting to look like a little dude sitting in a house, and it looked like he was like in meditation or something. I don't know. And then to me, it looked like this figure started to look like he was looking inside of like a mirror or something, but he was seeing like the shadow of a cobra. So like in my head, it started looking something like that. Now, the geometry is so aligned that once I overlaid another, so we got an inverted tetrahedron here, and I take one of that same size and I bring that into the fold, you see that it's lining up with like the corners of the house and all this. So we got like this perfect geometric shape that resembles the Merkaba. And so the Merkaba is supposed to be the chariot that, you know, helps you ascend into the heavens and so on and so forth. And in the West, a lot of people have no idea what that's actually describing. And so it becomes some spooky stuff. But by the time I'm done with you, hopefully you'll have some deeper insight into what's really going on with that. Okay, so it says after sitting with the running man for a few days, let me see. All right, yeah. So once again, the whole concept was, okay, I had that thing, the running man part, but I felt like it needed to have some sound. So if that was like the body, the inverted tetrahedron, in my opinion, was like the, you know, the opposite gendered aspect, if you will. So if one side is going to be the material side of it, the spirit that goes through it is going to be the animating force, the ruach, if you will. And so that's what the pun that was dad Joe animated, because we just talked about Ani, which meant earth. Okay, Eve. Okay, so Eve is an interesting word etymologically, because if you look at it, it does serve to some extent in becoming the basis for the English word even, but of course it is said to originate from the Hebrew word for life force, which is something a little bit more like haywire. That's something like, let me see. So you get something like, well, all right, well, yeah. So sometimes you see like something like this or something in that neighborhood. All right, and that ends up contributing partly to some ways of defining Yahweh, because they consider him the breathing one, so that breath, that life force. So when you hear Eve, there's a little more to that. So she's the breath, the life force, if you will. And so this is where you get that idea of the double, the even. So we work that out, Ina Ani, to have something to do with the even fire or a twin flame. That is relevant here because, of course, the tetrahedron itself, it is it symbolizes fire and will and things of that nature. And then so if you're bringing two of those together to form a Merkaba, bada bing, bada boom, twin flame. It represents the masculine and the feminine. All right. Was getting into some of the meanings of the letters themselves. Here we talk about the sacred sound Om. Om is not the same as Om. Sorry to tell it to you. This guy right here actually means vanity. whereas this one means realization. Because the realization is, if you're only chanting Om as some, I don't know, some like religious thing or some airy fairy type of thing or whatever, you're just making a noise. It's not necessarily doing anything of value for you. However, if you understand that it's actually 3 separate syllables, now you can feel the separation of the sound and then where it actually vibrates the torso. So this hits near the navel. This is directed near the heart. This is directed in the throat. So this teaches you how to make a standing wave within your body. That is when you have a note that basically takes advantage of the hollow parts of the body in order to send vibration through the whole lattice of the body. So you can do some things with that because several aspects of your tissues and bone and fascia and all of that are piezoelectric. Piezo meaning like stone, electric. And so this means that a material, when it is placed under mechanical stress, be it from actually warping it or from striking it or from shaking it or sending sound through it, it produces an electric field. And so you can actually direct current from this and produce electricity. So your body is an electricity generator for that reason. All right, let's see. So to sound. Hexagram, which is Star David. Hexagram is just a fancy word for the 6-point star. Hex meaning 6 in Greek. Bone 2 triangles makes a 6-point star. Count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Hexagram. All right. I mentioned the Cobra, Shiva's tri-shoulder weapon. So Shiva holds what looks like a trident off of from Little Mermaid's daddy. It looks like it. A tri-shoulder weapon, and it has like a. So this had nothing to do with a devil or some mess like that. There's some later type of stuff or whatever, but it actually represents the Trinity. All right, so you got the creator, the sustainer, and the destroyer who prepares for the resurrection. That's what those 3 points actually mean. The only devil that's out there, we already know who that is. All right. Yeah, it says as I placed a third larger right side up triangle, we just went over that. The Merkaba, the chariot, is literally what that means. Remember Egyptian myrrh, Mer, Kar, Bar. So they will never tell you that this is Egyptian, but so myrrh, so that's a word for either pyramid or water course or even heap of corpses. The Ka is the it's like the personality, the life force, so Eve, quote unquote. And then Ba, that is the acting power, the ability to act in the physical world. So ancestors, spirits, whatever else, their capacity to be able to act in the physical world or to traverse the spirit world like you would in an out-of-body experience that is associated with the Ba. Okay, and then when these two come together, they form the Ak, which is called the light body in some cases. The light body, same thing as the Ruach. That's why you get Ruach. All right. Ruach. coming from the same place. All right. Merkaba or Merak. All right. Those three things come together: the vehicle and the light body. All right. So we talk a little bit about, let's see. Okay. So yes. So while we call the Star David, it had nothing to do with Judaism until 1897. It was adopted by the Zionist movement, people who believed that the Jews should have a physical land to call their own, despite what the circumstances for them not having that land was in the Bible. They felt they should have a certain land set aside just for Jews, convert or otherwise, because they do not care about DNA tests in modern day Israel. It's not necessarily the Israel of the Bible. Stuff kept getting destroyed. People kept moving around. But I digress. Case in point, that was not a Jewish symbol initially. And in fact, it is better known as the symbol of the Saturn god. So this is associated with Saturn. And you'll find Saturn associated with a number of motifs involving justice, karma, and time is associated with Saturn. Things of this nature. Order is associated with Saturn. It's oftentimes rigid order. And so if you look at like Greek mythology, Zeus, so Saturn is the Roman name of Kronos, who was the father of Zeus, who Zeus usurped and overthrew. And, he's Jupiter in Roman. And so that name is also called Jovan, which is dangerously similar to Yavin, the son of Japheth or Japheth in the Bible, Noah's son. And thing is, this usurper of sorts, who was also thought to be associated with the Yavanas and potentially the Yamanayas, who were notorious for conquering and coming through and, conquering the lands of Europe where indigenous peoples were living, the native Britons and folks like that. These Yamanayas came in and, did what they do. But, case in point, that name associated with Jupiter and all of that has to do with joy. So it was this idea of introducing doing what you enjoy as opposed to simply adhering to rigid order. You have a mission, a destiny, if you will, when you come into here, but it's not nearly as rigid as you would think. It is just a guideline that tells you the trajectory you are on. You have momentum. You can do what you want, but I guarantee you it is much easier if you know what you came here to do. Period. All right, so that reconciliation had happened there, but again, had nothing to do with Judaism until 1897 in an official capacity when they adopted it for Israel's flag later on in 1948, but they was using it in the Zionist movement already. All right, so Babylonian stuff is what that is. Even the Arabs were using that before it ever had anything to do with Judaism. All right, but probably the oldest usage of it, because Odinala is said to go back like 100,000 years according to oral tradition, is as Agu. So the equivalent of this same concept, and this is how we know it was probably African before it was this, because they don't even associate any of this with that in Judaism now. But this had to do with Agu, who was pretty much the equivalent of that same faculty, the messenger, the part that is able to connect back to the original source light and bring back and translate information, if you will. They say it has two heads, and these are masculine and the feminine. And it says that when a dibia, that is the equivalent to a babalawo in Yoruba culture, or a priesthood, one of those kind of guys, a medicine man. He says when the dibia is able to turn the two faces toward each other in his head, then he is able to utilize this chariot in order to traverse the spirit world. So almost identical purpose to the Merkaba. Well, when it says turn them toward each other, what you're talking about is the entrainment of the two brain hemispheres. You have a left and a right. So we often refer to these as masculine side and feminine side. One is logic, one is receptive and takes in everything, regardless of the order or anything. Just make sure it gets complete information. The left side works to dissect it, cut it up, try to make sense of it, try to make order of it. Saturnian, if you will. All right, and then how do you get the brain hemispheres to sync up? Easiest way is binaural beats. And I explained that in the previous episode, how you play two frequencies within the ear that basically cancel out to a unheard signal that is the difference between the two. And if you set that frequency to align with the alpha to theta range, then that allows you to experience the out-of-body experience. There's other stuff that goes into that a little bit, but that is the basic thing that gets the two hemispheres synced together so that you can do that. All right, symbols also used as the Shatkona and the Yoni in Vedic teaching. Very similar application, the union of the masculine and feminine represented by Shiva and Shakti, which are pretty much the equivalent to Chi and Eke. Like, there's so many alignments between Igbo Odinala in Africa and the Vedic teachings that it is ridiculous to think that the proto group that from which Igbo, Yoruba, and Bantu all originate from was not also connected in some way to these particular people. We have the D haplogroup, the base form of it appears in Nigeria among Yoruba, Edo, and Igbo, and then you end up having it isolated in the Andaman Islands, and so the people of South India were mixed with these islanders and stuff, and they had it too. But then you had other later groups, younger groups that came in, and so you see more of a couple of other different haplogroups in the male line in India now. But initially, early on, it was the same folks. Those D and E haplogroups were widespread for a good little minute, so don't get it twisted. Not as separate as they want you to think it is. All right, so let's see. So they fit together. I find it. So I feel like there's something else in there. I think that was the main thing. So we went over Ren Fan, talked a little bit about Agu, talked about how the pieces fit together there, or whatever. You start getting this symbol that's starting to look like a little some, at least a little more than it did with the Running Man alone. But we are nowhere near the finish line here. Like, this is cute, and that was cool. That's where it started, and that's where it was for a minute. But then I sat on this thing for a little while, and then started playing around with it, and then that's when it really started getting real on them. or whatever. And so we'll talk about that in the next one. Is there anything else that I want to hit you with? If you have questions, be sure to drop them in the comments, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. But if you haven't already, go ahead, hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube right now, and then make sure you have your copy. If you've still been slacking and you don't have that physical in your hand, I don't know what to tell you, man. I don't know what to tell you. I got to break this stuff down so that you can digest it, because it's heavy lifting. But if you got the basics under your belt, you'll be all right. But I think that's good enough for today or whatever. I'll catch you in the next one. And on that note, I'm going to say peace.